From the EPR Creation Studio, this is Unconquered with Doc Staples, bringing you the Hot Takes edition after Miami of Florida beats Florida State in the rivalry game at Florida State, 28-22. As always, this podcast brought to you by EPR Creations, bringing you the best of internet marketing and website development for an affordable price. By Luis Marquez of Momentum Realty in Jacksonville, Florida. A pretty frustrated Luis Marquez, who is from Miami and was texting me throughout the game. But, you know, it is what it is. This is rivalry football. By Shenandoah Newsma of shenrealestate.com in the Research Triangle of North Carolina, and by Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida. Well, let's go ahead and get to it. First things first, I think this game in a lot of ways matched up with what we talked about. And I know some of you are going to go, wait, what? You know, you projected Florida State to win this game. Yeah, I did. But that's the thing, is anytime you're projecting how things might go and looking at most likely scenarios and all of that, there's always a lot of variability, a lot of variance. And in this game, the variance was basically in the turnover battle. Florida State turned it over 3 times for 14 points off of turnovers. And that was basically the ball game. Miami scored 28 points despite 3 Florida State turnovers and 14 points off turnovers. And, you know, I projected Florida State would average about 6 yards per play. They averaged about 4.9. So that was a little bit lower there. I was thinking somewhere between 5.5 and 6. And then Miami, I had averaging below 4 yards per carry, and that's what they did. And the thing that I said that I thought this game would come down to, and that you had to be willing for it to come down to on the defensive side, was you had to make Carson Beck beat you down the field. You had to make him beat you with some big plays on vertical routes. And quite frankly, he did that early. He missed one. He hit 2 of them that were key. Then he hit Malachi Toney on a little snag type concept on that little inside route, and Toney flashed the speed and ran away from the defense there. So you had 3 long pass plays that basically changed the game for Miami. Two on shorter, little shorter things, and then one deep one to CJ Daniels early in the game, and that basically was the game. But you look at what Florida State was able to do against Miami up front, and I'm seeing people on social media and so on talking about how Florida State, you know, they couldn't match up front and so on. And I say BS. Florida State averaged more rushing yards per carry than Miami did. Miami had 32 carries for 97 yards, 3 yards per carry. That's not great. That's, you know, a far cry from what Miami's been able to do. That's exactly what you needed to do if you were Florida State and you were hoping to win this football game. That's exactly what you were hoping for. And they were able to do that. Florida State was able to do that in their run defense. They were able to take advantage of some of the things that Miami likes to do. And they were, by and large, able to limit the run game enough to be able to win this game. Florida State's defense played well enough to win this game. Just flat, plain and simple. Florida State's defense played well enough to win this game. You got 2 turnovers. They gave up 14 off turnovers and still only gave up 28 points and, 3 yards per carry. I felt like you needed to score offensively for Florida State. You needed to score over 30 in this game to win. Well, they didn't. And they would have needed to score over 30. Instead, they turned it over 3 times. They had another couple drives that fizzled out where they were moving the football and just didn't finish. You look at those first drives. That first drive on script, they were able to move the football 11 plays, 70 yards, moved very crisply, and then bogged down in the red zone. Wound up. Actually, I think there was a pass interference there on the one play on second down. I know Mike Norvell was pretty upset about it. The officiating expert on ABC made the same observation I did, where, that given all that contact, that's normally going to be a flag. They let him play, I think, a good portion of the night, and that was one of them. but I thought that probably should have been called. But regardless, they get down inside the 5 and then don't score a touchdown. And I thought it was key in this game. We talked about this in the pregame. It was key in this game that Florida State get off to a decent enough start. What you didn't want Miami to be able to do is to basically play completely their game, to just sit on the football, to, play with no pressure, with all the leverage in the game. And that's basically what happened. Florida State goes down, does not score a touchdown on the first drive. Miami doesn't score on their next drive. Then Florida State punts, and then Miami scores 2 touchdowns after that first punt and then the interception. And all of a sudden it's 14-3. And suddenly now you're playing off schedule, you're off leverage in terms of the way that the game is going to be played. And, you're battling uphill the rest of the way. And quite honestly, I thought that this was not one of Gus Malzahn's best games as a play caller. I thought there was, altogether too much getting cute, where they were able to run the football at times when they wanted to, when they committed to running the football. When, Chroma got going, he was able to break some tackles and run the football. Sawchuk was able to break some tackles and run the football. And the offensive line got some movement. I mean, Gavin Sawchuk, 11 carries for 47 yards, 4.3 yards per carry. Chroma, 6 carries for 23, 3.8 yards per carry. And that's without big plays. Those guys were actually able to do enough to potentially move the chains. And I thought 17 total carries between the two of them was too few. That's my primary critique in this one on the offensive side, is I think Malzahn didn't trust enough the fact that they were getting wins up front and that they were able to run the football with Sawchuk and Chroma. And I think they could have done a little bit more with some quarterback power and some of those things with Castellanos as well. They should not coming into this game, if you had told me that Tommy Castellanos would have 45 pass attempts, I'd have told you Florida State lost. You can't play that game. You can't go in and try to play that game with this offense. I don't care if you go down 14-3. There's still plenty of time in the game. You're still able to run the football. Stick with what you do well, and that's really running the football. And the other thing is that Miami had done such a good job. They did a good job of scouting for a lot of the horizontal stuff, all the eye candy and all the different options that Malzahn packages with his running game. They did a great job of working with that and, getting vertical, getting upfield. Well, at that point, that actually allows you to run the ball and to run between the tackles. And that's the thing that I think they just got out of rhythm. And Gus has always been a real rhythm play caller. He got out of rhythm tonight. And I think when they go back and they look at this tape, they're going to kick themselves and go, we had opportunities there to just stay patient and to just keep running it and keep turning up the tempo. There were times where Miami's defensive line, you could see them starting to get gassed. You could see them starting to wear down. And I didn't think FSU was able to step on their throat there with just pounding them with the running game the way that they probably could have at that time. All of a sudden you'd see a double reverse pass attempt or some sort of screen attempt or different things that, they brought into the game. And I understand you want to run some of the wrinkles that you had to try to get some things off of what you may have shown. But to me, I thought they outthought themselves today. And frankly, that's where they got outcoached. And, even on the fourth down, the little trick play there, which Herb Street bizarrely thought was an early snap. He was deceived enough by it that it was an early snap. That was one where I understand the call. You've run it before with some success. It worked against Alabama. But I think, again, there's a point at which you just line up and play. And that was maybe the pivotal play of the game. That interception on 4th and 5 or 4th and 7 or whatever it was. And all of a sudden that flips the field. It's like a long, there's a 45 or 55 yard return. It's like giving up a long punt return or something. All of a sudden that flips the field. And then Miami on the next play does the right thing and they run a flea flicker and they score. That changed the game. And all of a sudden, like I said, you're playing behind in terms of leverage the rest of the way. And I thought the coaching staff let that affect them in how they called the game. And I'm sitting there at home going, stay patient, no, stop dropping back, stop doing this. You've got to understand the team you're playing against. You don't lean into playing the game that they want you to play. Even though you're down, just keep chopping wood, keep doing it. And they would start doing it, and they'd move the football a little bit, and then all of a sudden they would step back and lose the focus there. And some of that was because of mistakes. I mean, they shot themselves in the foot multiple times. You had Deuce Robinson with a fumble. You had Usman Kroma with a very, very key fumble. You had a key penalty called on your left tackle, or not on your left tackle, on your backup right guard on Jacob Rizzi. So, and that killed that drive. I mean, that's 3 drives right there where you're moving the football and all of a sudden the drive dies. Then you had another where, you threw the interception on 4th and 7. You had another where there was, had one other additional interception that was a key and bad decision. And it was one where, you got to understand the situation. It's 1st and 10, live to see another play. Don't just throw a ball up when you've got a backside corner who's going to be there. You just can't get greedy. And I thought they got greedy way too many times on offense, and Miami was happy to take advantage of them getting greedy. And that's where this game basically was decided. Some people are saying, oh, Miami was just so much superior, so superior athlete-wise or what. I'm sorry, I just didn't see that. The one guy who looked superior athletically was Malachi Toney. You saw the burst, you saw the speed, him run away from Florida State's linebackers and secondary. That play was the one play in the entire game where somebody looked athletically superior to everybody else out there. Otherwise, this was a very evenly contested game, with the exception of 3 turnovers, a couple key penalties, and just repeated poor situational play. And as far as I'm concerned, this is very similar. This was basically the inverse of the Florida State-Alabama game, where in that game, Alabama crapped the bed on every opportunity to make a key play. You think about, they've got a quarterback rolling out with nobody in front of him on a 4th down and 4 or whatever. And all Simpson has to do is tuck the football and run for the first down. And all of a sudden that's a ball game. Instead, he winds up to throw it, throws it in the dirt, and Florida State takes that ball and they go down and score, and the game changes. It's one example. How many balls did their top receiver, whose name is escaping me right now, it's late, how many balls did he drop? He had 3 or 4 drops in that game, and several of them were plays where he would have had potential significant yak. So Alabama was in a position where, yes, I know the metrics all say Florida State was 90-some% chance of winning that game, and I understand that, but math isn't always the way that it works. If you go back and you watch that tape, I did the tape breakdown of that Alabama game, and I said, look, the plays were there to be made in the secondary. If Alabama makes a couple of those plays, this game goes down to the wire if it doesn't go the other way. I said that then when I did the film session, and I'm guaranteeing that when I go through the film of this Florida State Miami game, I'm going to wind up saying they had every opportunity to win this game. They were able to, they were in position to win this game. They just didn't make those plays the same way that Alabama didn't make those plays in the opener. Florida State just didn't make the key plays when they had those opportunities. And that's what this game came down to. And they made it too easy for Alabama because they pressed. This, to me, seemed like a Florida State team that played desperate, and there's pluses to that in one sense, but there's also, it's the whole John Wooden thing, play fast but don't hurry. Florida State played hurried at times in this game. It seemed almost as though they were the visiting team. And that, Miami was the more mature team in that respect, the calmer team, but it was easier for them to do that because they played with a lead all night. And that was the thing that I didn't think you could do, that coming in, it's like, you can't let Miami just play with the lead all night. You've got to keep that close. If you get a lead early, you might be able to get them out of their game, and then all of a sudden this changes. And I still hold to that. Florida State ran 83 plays on the night. They got exactly what they wanted in that respect. 404 total yards. Now, a lot of that was in the fourth quarter, when Miami at that point was, very much, trying to just salt it away. But 19 plays for 188 yards in the fourth quarter, or 19 points in the fourth quarter, 188 total yards on, 35 plays in the fourth quarter for 5.4 yards per play. So that's right along the area of kind of what we expected in the game itself on the whole. And Miami started to wear down there defensively. But the thing was, Florida State had given up too much with those early turnovers to where that 19 points in the fourth quarter, where I think FSU is actually the fresher team in the fourth quarter, that didn't matter. The game was decided by the end of the third quarter. And again, Miami didn't take off the gas, but Florida State was able to put some pressure on them in certain respects. They didn't take off the gas defensively. I think they did offensively in the fourth quarter. But you saw some of what was there, what was available, even though at that point it was much more throwing the football than running. Anyway, I think otherwise you look at some of the other things that emerged in this game. I thought Jerry Wilson had a very, very tough game. He got taken advantage of multiple ways. The technique was not great in a couple of those. The goal line slant was way too easy for CJ Daniels. Tony just ran away from him on that little snag route that he took to the house. There are a couple others where he didn't play great, and they went straight after him. They didn't fear the guy that had 2 interceptions on the season for Florida State, has played reasonably well so far. They went straight at him, and honestly, they were able to take advantage of him. They were able to run by him. I think the other thing that concerns you is that this is the second week in a row where, against Virginia and against Miami, you had too many situations where your defensive line was in fantastic shape, had every opportunity, gave you every opportunity to get a stop, and then your defensive line wasn't rewarded with that because your second-level players just didn't finish the tackle and got pushed back, backs leaning forward and falling forward way too much. But the defensive line largely won their matchup in this game. I thought Florida State's offensive line largely won their matchup in this game. They were at least a stalemate, I would say. Miami got some pressure at times. You were going to expect that, especially from the edges, but especially before Micah Pettis went out. And I think there is some concern that he may be gone for some extended time. Before he went out, Florida State was able to move the line of scrimmage the way that they wanted and the way that they expected. That's a good sign. But you got to take advantage of it, and you got to finish drives, and they did not do that. To me, it's just about that. And, Castellanos, some of this falls at his feet. He missed some key throws. He missed some key reads. There were times where his eyes would come down. There were a couple cases where he missed key reads where he missed opportunities because he essentially either let his eyes come down or he didn't understand where the protection, where blitzes were coming from. And I thought Miami did an excellent job defensively of essentially understanding Florida State's protection rules so that Florida State would set their protection and then Miami would bring their extra rusher from where the protection was not going to be. Essentially, that's the guy that the quarterback's responsible for. And they got a lot of free rushers there. And, the people who don't understand how protections work, they see this and they're going, well, there's an offensive lineman there who's not blocking anybody, and then that guy's coming free. The offensive line's responsible for that. No, he's not. That's not how that works. What's happening is they're mugging that gap so that he's responsible for a player in that gap. And the protection is working, let's say, strong right, so the center has to turn right because of what players are biggest threats to come. And then they would drop the guys that were mugging and they would bring somebody, say, from the left. Once they've got you going strong right, they bring him from the outside left, and there's nobody there to actually pick that guy up. And I thought that was one of the best things that Miami was able to do. You could see the benefit of them having the open date right before Florida State. in the way that they were able to take advantage of some protections. And, I thought Castellanos in a couple cases was unprepared to really recognize where the blitzer was coming from, especially on this blind side a couple times. And they missed a couple plays because of it. But like I said, I think this game on the whole, I think the win, I haven't looked at the win probability, but the win probability, was probably over 90% for Miami in this game. But in terms of the overall quality of the teams and, sort of how this game went, it was not as lopsided in terms of the teams themselves, in terms of play-by-play quality as it was in that respect. And that's normal. That is a usual thing. The old saying in football is that almost every game comes down to about 5 plays. And Florida State lost basically all 5 of those plays in this game, just like they did against Virginia last week. They found ways to lose this game, putting the ball on the turf, throwing the ball up for grabs, just making some very poor situational plays when for the remainder of the game, they were actually in a position of actually physically winning and actually being able to push Miami around in ways Miami had not been pushed this year. And, if these two teams played 10 times, maybe Miami wins more than 50%. It's possible, but I'm not sure. I think I would probably, having watched this, I would probably bet on that at this point, just based on how well Beck was able to throw down the field and because of what Tony was able to do when he got his hands on the ball in a couple cases. But the thing is, are we going to be guaranteeing that Beck hits those throws the next time? He missed a couple, especially once he got a little bit out of rhythm in the second half. He started missing some of those throws, and that's what you're kind of counting on. And what happens if Florida State plays a little bit more, a little bit less desperate in some of these respects and just does their thing instead of trying to do too much? Don't know. But either way, I do think this is one where, just like the Alabama opener, you're going to see people overreact to this and basically determine that, whatever Florida State did in that opener was fool's gold. And whatever they did here was really who this team is. They're really the team that was down 28-3 against Miami. And the truth is, as I said after the Alabama game, the truth is this is a good Florida State football team. It's a very good Florida State football team. It may be a 10-win Florida State football team, but there were warts that showed up on the Alabama film that were legitimate warts that were things that I was very clear. I pointed those things out on film. I talked about them on podcast. Said, well, the question is going to be which teams can expose these warts, but they're there. They got exposed the last 2 weeks. Looking forward, the question is how many teams left on your schedule actually can expose those warts. And, looking forward at your next game, you got Pittsburgh. Pitt's a physical football team. They're going to try to run downhill at you and do a lot of the things that Miami did. Absolutely. But the fact of the matter is you basically handled Miami doing that. It was the other things that Miami beat you on. It was turning the football over. You should be able to handle Pittsburgh being able to do that. Then you get Stanford out in the West Coast. You just have to survive the weirdness of that being a 10:30 p.m. game. Then you get a Wake team you should beat. Clemson had a get-right game against a very bad North Carolina team today. We'll see what that is when you get there, but that's a team that can take advantage of some of your warts. Virginia Tech, probably not. NC State, maybe. Florida, maybe. So, the remainder of the season, you've got a lot of very winnable games, a couple games where, as we talked prior to the season, look, if you go 8-4, that's probably a really good step forward. If you go 9-3, that's probably take that before the season and you say, yep, that's a good season. If you go 10-2 from here, it's a great finish to the season. Do I think that's the most likely finish? Probably not. I think the schedule's probably a little bit too much for that to happen. And again, if you've got Pettis out for any length of time and, you think he got rolled up on there, I think that's something you got to worry about. But, I don't think that this season is really all that far from expectation at this point. I think it's disappointing for a lot of people because after the Alabama game, you did have there's a possibility you could go in and really do something this year. I mean, you could suddenly, you look at the schedule. If you can beat that Alabama team, you can beat anybody on your schedule. And that's true. But you lose in overtime on the road at Virginia, and then you turn it over 3 times to your rival and you lose by 6. Well, I mean, that's all within the boundaries, within the delta of what you could expect. So from here, all you got to do is keep plugging away. The thing that is maybe the most positive thing to come out of this is the way that they finished. 19 points in the fourth quarter, straining, playing hard, and with pride, even though at that point they all pretty much knew that they probably weren't going to come back and win that game. But you still score 19 points in the fourth quarter, and you go out. If you're going to go out, you go out, on your shield. And those guys went out on their shield. Good for them. Now you've got to lick your wounds and come back and beat a good Pittsburgh team next week. So I'll get the film on this tomorrow. Hopefully I'll get an opportunity to break this down earlier rather than later in the week. But already I have a pretty good sense of what I'm going to see just because of, the fact that Florida State just missed on those key situations. And, I'm going to see a lot of opportunities where they should have run it and they didn't, and where they should have just stayed more to their true core and they didn't. And, the combination of those things, I think, hurt them. But you live by that stuff, you die by it. And tonight they died by it. This was not, their finest game. And we talked about it a couple weeks ago. This was a Miami team you probably needed to play at minimum an A-level game, if not an A-plus level game to beat. I thought it was you needed an A-level performance. And I think you got about a B- because of essentially, peeing down your leg in those key situations. So as often is the case, the lows are not quite as low as it seems, and the highs are not quite as high as they seem. We still are watching a good football team that, just like we talked about at the beginning of the season, somewhere 8 or 9 wins is probably where this team ends up. 10 would be great. Beyond that was probably unlikely, and you're still there. So we're going to go ahead and wrap there. I'll be back later in the week to talk film. I'm going to post that as soon as I can actually get that recorded, which, depending on how my other scheduling commitments and things allow and when I'm actually able to get to that, could be as early as Sunday, could be a little bit later. But I'm going to get that going, and then later in the week we'll get back to a little bit more discussion of this, and then also the Pittsburgh game on air where we're not doing video, and then we'll revisit and get back to the Pittsburgh preview. So until then, this has been Unconquered with Doc Staples. I'm your host, Doc Staples. Thanks for listening. If you've been enjoying this podcast, please leave a 5-star rating over at Apple Podcasts and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Post and repost episodes on social media and tell a friend. And if you haven't left a review in a while, do it again. It really does help the visibility of the podcast. Before we go, I'd also like to thank my advertising partners once more. That's EPR Creations, Luis Marquez of Momentum Realty in Jacksonville, Florida, Shenandoah Real Estate in the Research Triangle of North Carolina, Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida, and Justin Galloway of Benchmark Mortgage, serving Florida, Tennessee, and Kentucky. You can also stop by the Unconquered Shop at unconqueredpodcast.com, where you can buy stickers, pins, magnets, t-shirts, and other swag. I am especially grateful for those of you at the Dynasty level. That is Brian Leininger, Dave Blair, Jack Horton, Jonathan Kennedy, Lee Caswell, Travis Smith, and Tyler Kashishki. You all are far more generous than I deserve. Thanks to you all. This has been Unconquered with Doc Staples. I'm your host, Jason Staples. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your support. I made this.